I'm a shorter than average girl from down under, and today we're going back to the Narniaverse. We're going to be looking at the 5th novel in C.S. Lewis's Chronicles and the final, yet not Disney movie, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So my first exposure to the story was a play, and it was the most confusing thing that I've ever seen. Getting into the book as a child, that didn't really help that much either. It's because unlike the typical fantasy novel, where you have a problem, a meaty middle, and a solution, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader is set as an odyssey. It wasn't until I got into mythology that I started to understand the reading style of this book. Just like Homer's Odyssey or Virgil's Aeneid, this story is a journey. Each location that the travelers go to teaches them something about themselves or about the world around them. So there's no need for a problem and a resolution. It's more like an adventure. See, my kid brain could not process this. So when the movie came along and made it into a mediocre fantasy epic, it made sense to my child self. Made being the operative word here. But now that I'm older, I've really come to appreciate the original novel and how it set out. So let's travel to the Eastern Ocean with Caspian, Lucy, Edmund, and their gang in this Narnian Odyssey. But if you're only here for the movie review, please click on the timestamp shown on the screen right now, or the one in the description, whichever suits you best. But for now, let's talk stories. Basically, after the end of the previous book and movie, Caspian does a really good job cementing peace and equality in Narnia. He defeats a rebellion from the giants in the north, and he makes pacts with the neighboring countries, so everything's looking good. However, Caspian wants to go and find the 7 lost lords, 7 men that were loyal to his father, and Miraz basically had them go on a wild goose chase to the east to get rid of them, so that when he comes and takes the throne from Caspian, no one's going to object to it. Now, back in London, Edmund and Lucy are staying with their cousin Eustace, because Peter has studies, so he's off with Professor Kirk, and Susan, being the golden child, gets to go on holiday with her parents to America. So they're not really having the best time because Eustace isn't the most charming person to be around.
If only one could treat relatives like one treats insects, all my problems would be solved. I could simply put them in a jar, pin them to my wall.
They notice a painting in the spare bedroom that Lucy's staying in, which reminds them a lot of Narnia. And all of a sudden, this painting starts to come alive, and they're transported back to Narnia. Here they meet the Dawn Treader, Caspian's ship, as he has embarked on his journey to find the 7 lost lords. And then together they have an incredible adventure, fighting sea serpents, getting into storms, and landing on some really strange and mysterious islands. The main islands that they end up going to are the Lone Islands, where there's a underground slave trade going on, and so they have to stop that. They end up going to a dragon island, a Deathwater island, the island where a magician named Corikin lives, the dark island where dreams and nightmares come true, and finally Ramandu's island. Here they're told by the daughter of Ramandu, Lilindel, that they have reached the edge of the end of the world. And given that they found 3 of the lords and Ramandu's island under an enchantment, the only way for them to break the enchantment is to continue to sail to the end of the world and leave one of their companions there. Now here, Caspian's adamant that he wants to do it because he wants to make it up to these seven lords that really helped his father, but then Aslan comes to him, reminding him of his duties, and so instead, Reepicheep the mouse is the volunteered sacrifice who will go beyond the end of the world. So after Caspian finds all seven of the lords, dead or alive, he ends up going back to Narnia and marrying Lilindil. And Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace all go back to the real world. It's a really nice story, and each of these islands has its own message to tell. But that's not the story given to us in the movie. The movie spins a different narrative, introducing a villain in the form of this green mist. Consequently, many of the elements from the original stories have either been changed or rearranged to fit this new narrative. It also gives us a bit of context about what the Seven Lords were doing. As soon as they make it to the lone islands and discover that people have been sacrificed to keep this green mist at bay, they decided that they want to destroy this green mist. And so on their adventures, they end up being told by magician Corikin that the only way that they can do it is by placing their 7 Narnian swords on Aslan's table, which is on Ramandu's island. So for some reason, 7 random Narnian swords at Aslan's table at the end of the world equals this kind of destructive magic, somehow. But unfortunately, the Seven Lords weren't able to do that, and that's why the green mist is still there. So now it's the gang's turn to try and stop it. But of course, it ain't gonna be that easy. The mist is going to tempt them. And so we find that each of the protagonists is tempted by this green mist in one way or another, which they first have to kind of defeat that temptation before they can achieve the final goal. But then the movie solves everything so sloppily. Basically, nothing really happens. And then after that, for some reason, Reepicheep ends up going to the end of the world. And I just feel cheated from this very emotional goodbye that we're meant to say to Reepicheep.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
So if you haven't guessed from the sarcasm in my voice, I'm not the biggest fan of the movie. There are just too many loose threads in terms of the plot, and it makes it hard to invest in. And the script, but still, somehow they managed to preserve the character development that Edmund and Lucy go through in this entire mess. The truth is, the journey is the most important thing in the story, which is something unfortunately lost in this adaptation. And it's because 20th Century Fox decided to change it from this adventure odyssey into a fantasy epic. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is quite literally a journey to Aslan's country and a metaphorical journey to the creator. Now, I know that I've been treading around and avoiding the talk on religiosity which is mentioned in C.S. Lewis's work, but I'm not going to be able to avoid it here. This story is about our connection to the creator, to God, and the journey is the human journey towards that destination. Each island represents one of the milestones that a human being, if they choose to take the journey towards God, will face in their path. Just like no person's gonna have the same experience, each of the crew members has a different reaction in each of the islands. Each learn a different lesson. And another thing that's really cool about this is order doesn't really matter here. They could have gone to Deathwater Island before going to Dragon Island, but they didn't. And that's the same with our journey. Each person's gonna hit these milestones at different times depending on what they're facing in life. So now let's go deeper into each of these islands and what happens to our protagonists at each. So the first islands that they go to when Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace come to Narnia are the Lone Islands. On the lone islands, there's an illegal slave trade occurring, but no one knows. And Caspian, Edmund, Lucy, Eustace, and Reepicheep all get caught by these slave traders. Caspian manages to escape because he is bought off by Lord Byrne, one of the 7 lost lords, who has been on this island trying to buy and free as many slaves as he possibly can. It is there where the two come together and come with a plan to destroy the slave trade on the lone islands once and for all. This island represents the first step of our journey towards God by unshackling ourselves from anything that's keeping us back. Before we can make our journey towards God, we're going to have to let go of the things that are going to hinder us in this journey. Things like materialistic desires and unfound emotions such as anger, hate, jealousy. When one unshackles themselves from all these burdens, then they are actually free to pursue what they want in life. The second island that the Dawn Treader makes it to is Dragon Island. After a storm had hit them, they had to stop to fix up the Dawn Treader and restock. But Eustace, who wasn't having any of Narnia,
But I don't know what kind of prank this is, but I want to wake up right now! I demand to know just where in the blazes am I! I'll have you know, as soon as we find civilization, I'm contacting the British consul. Have you all arrested for kidnapping.
decided he didn't want to help out, so he ran away to go exploring. He finds a dragon on the brink of death, and after the dragon passes, he decides to steal the dragon's gold.
Anyone knows a dragon's treasure is enchanted.
One of the things that he steals is a wristband, and when he puts it on, he himself transforms into a dragon. Now, Eustace struggles to get rid of this himself, and even when Aslan comes to him and tells him to scratch at his skin, Eustace can't take off that dragon layer that is now enchanted to him. And it wasn't until Aslan himself scratched at the dragon skin and went really deep that he was unable to take the boy Eustace out of the dragon body. And so Eustace learns a super important lesson about the layers that we put on ourselves to make us have this strong external appearance, which isn't really true to ourselves. Many of us place masks when we're in social situations or even in survival mode to be able to cope with what we are going through, but that's ingenuine to who we truly are. And as a consequence, our inner self suffers and we find ourselves in more pain than we are in the happiness of being able to be in control of the situation around us. It wasn't until Eustace was unburdened from these layers that he had caused on himself because he wanted power. He didn't want to put in the effort and the work into things. He was frustrated and annoyed with his current situation, that then he was able to find that peace and happiness within himself. And the only person who was able to help him in this particular situation was Aslan. So again, one of the things that many people go through as a milestone in their life is trying to understand themselves for who they are and get rid of the burdenous layers that they have added so that they could fit in and conform to the current living conditions that they're in that are making them unhappy. Funnily enough, it turns out that the wristband belonged to one of the 7 lost lords, Lord Octesian, meaning that he ended up finding his fate on Dragon Island, whether that be because he himself turned into a dragon and was that dragon that Eustace saw die, or that he was consumed by it. Either way, it tells us about the dangers of not being able to shed those layers before it's too late. end up going to is initially called Goldwater Island, later changed to Deathwater Island. On this island, there was nothing there except for a pool of water with a armor next to it. When they look at the armor, they find that it belonged to the lost Lord Restima. And at the bottom of the pool, they could see a golden statue of a man. This is where Edmund goes a bit closer and a flick of water makes it on his boot, turning it into gold. This is where they realize that this particular pool has the capability of turning anything it touches into gold, which is probably what happened to poor Lord Restima. He was so parched and dehydrated that he decided to go for a swim, not knowing this was going to be his final fate. However, what Caspian soon realized is whoever had access to this pool could be the wealthiest and most powerful man in Narnia, and so he claims it to the throne, swearing all the others who were there that if they told another soul, that he would condemn them to death. And so this is where Edmund jumps in, saying that you can't do this to us. I am your equal. I am a king like you are, so you have no authority over me. And they end up getting into a squabble that Lucy tries hard to break but couldn't. And this is where Aslan steps in. And when they see Aslan, they forget everything that had just happened in the last few moments. This here is a reminder about how power can get to someone's mind, and that the only break to power is by seeing someone who is the most powerful. In a believer's journey, they will reach a point where they forget to be grateful for everything that they have in their life. It's only when they see the power of God that they start to realize that this isn't from themselves and it's from a higher power, recognizing that they are nothing compared to it. But someone who does end up being consumed by their own power is doomed to fail, sink to the bottom of the ocean with no possibility of swimming up except with extreme power or external help. And so, Deathwater Island seems to be the most fitting name for drunkenness and power. The fourth island they end up going to is the island of the magician Corikin. It's a very neat and kept place, but they couldn't find any residents there until Lucy started to hear voices about people trying to cut them off from the Dawn Treader. When they went back to the Dawn Treader, they find that they are ambushed by invisible individuals. These individuals claim to be duffers, and they say that the lord of this island, aka the magician, is super oppressive, and that he was the one who changed their appearance from normal to monopods. And because they couldn't stand their new appearance, they decided to sneak into his house, use his magic to turn themselves invisible. But now they're kind of getting sick of being invisible as well, and so they need someone to reverse the spell. And for some reason, the only person that could do that was a woman, so they needed Lucy to go into the mansion and read the spell to make the unseen seen. To save her friends, Lucy bravely agrees to go into the mansion, and she does find the Book of Incantations. When flipping through, she finds an incantation which would make her beautiful beyond a lot of mortals. In her vanity and her jealousy for not being stereotypically beautiful, Lucy starts reading the spell. But when she does, she sees Aslan's face staring back at her, and so she stops and does what she was intending to do, reading the spell of making the unseen seen. When she does that, she finds that Aslan is indeed in the room with her, and so is the magician, and they are there to welcome her. Aslan tells her that there's no need for her to doubt herself or how important she is. They later tell the story of the magician Corikin. He was once a star, but Aslan brought him down so that he could help the Duffers because they were misguided and they had no idea what to do with their life. However, the Duffers didn't like the fact that someone was here to advise them and thought that he was being controlling. Consequently, they decided to rebel, and to stop the rebellion, for some reason, he decided to turn them into monopods. They got disgusted with their own appearance and they couldn't stand looking at each other, that they decided to turn themselves invisible, condemning themselves to this particular fate, just because they don't want to receive advice. Now, this island has a lot to give. From Lucy's standpoint, she learned to value her own importance, to understand that no matter how she looked like or how people are treating her, she deserves to be here, and that she shouldn't be comparing herself to others just so that she could become what she wants to be. Sometimes when we're not treated the way that we want to be treated, we start to question our own value, wondering whether there's something wrong with us rather than something wrong with the world around us. And so Aslan is there to remind her that it's not you. You're important. You're of value. Don't question that. Don't try to change it so that you would somehow get the respect that you want from other people. As for the magician Corikin and the Duffers, well, this introduces the assigned person by God who was sent for a group of people, aka the concept of prophethood. In this particular situation, Aslan deemed these individuals, the Duffers, of requiring additional assistance from him, and thus he sent a representative of himself in the form of a guiding star to help them become better versions of themselves. However, in many stories that we see in the Bible, the Torah, and the Quran, many people weren't recipient to the prophets that God has sent them, and as a consequence, doomed themselves to a worse off fate that they were in before. All of this could have been avoided if they were willing to listen to the signs of God. Moving on, the fifth island that they end up going to is the Dark Island, the island where dreams and nightmares come true. So when they're sailing towards it, there's this mist around them that thickens and thickens and thickens. And then there is someone overboard that they rescue who ends up being Lord Roop. Lord Roop has gone into a psychotic state due to how long he has stayed on this island and tells them to turn back before it's too late, because whatever they imagine is going to come true, whether they like it or not. And so the first thing that they all do is try to turn back, but they get lost in this mist. Lucy goes to the front of the Dawn Treader and she prays to Aslan, asking him to save them from the mists. And this is when a beam of light comes out of the sky and an albatross comes and he leads them all out of these mists. Now, this island's here to remind us that we can have ambitions and thoughts and dreams, but not everything that we want is actually beneficial for us. We don't know the extent of our own capabilities. And so it's okay when things don't always come true, because if they do come true, we may not be equipped to handle it. And so the only way that we'll be able to understand what dreams are possible for us and what dreams we should follow and aspire towards is through the help of a guiding hand, which will lead us towards the correct path rather than leaving us in the mix-up confusion of our own imagination. The final island that they go to before the end of the world is Ramandu's island. Here they find a stone table with 3 men sitting at the end of it. Now, these 3 men, they're in a trance. They're alive, but they're not awake. They're asleep, but their eyes are open. They camp for the night, and the next morning, Lilindel, the daughter of Ramandu, who is also a star, comes to them and tells them that they have reached the beginning of the end of the world. She also tells them that the 3 men sitting on the stone table are the remaining lords that Caspian is looking for, that they had reached here. They had accomplished the wild goose chase that Miraz had sent them on, but they were undecisive of what to do next. One of the lords wanted to stay and reside on the island, living out the rest of his days there in peace. The second lord wanted to return back to Narnia so that he could tell everyone that they had actually accomplished what they were sent out for and live his life the way that he had before. And the final lord wanted to continue sailing to the east, trying to see what else is out there. But then their debate gets into a disagreement, and their disagreement gets into a heated argument, and the final lord picks up a stone knife from the table. This stone knife was the same one that the White Witch uses to sacrifice Aslan in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it is also the reason why Ramandu and Lilindel are on the island. They are there to guard the stone knife and make sure that it's never used. But when the third lord picked up the knife, he condemned himself and his pals to this eternal state. The only way for them to break the state is by having somebody sail to the edge of the world and then voluntarily stay there. Caspian makes a vow that he will be the one to do this to rescue the lords that were so dear to his father. After leaving Lord Roop there so that he could join his companions in a deep sleep, they all set off to the utter east. Here, everything becomes so sweet. The water is no longer salty, there are lilies floating everywhere, but it's no longer deep enough for the Dawn Treader to continue. And so this is where Caspian tells his crew of his intention and for them to return to Narnia and pick a new king. Now the crew is absolutely outraged. They're like, we're not having this. You are our king. And this is when Aslan comes to Caspian, telling him, they're right. You are their king. You cannot leave them. You have more important duties here. Reepicheep stands up and volunteers to continue. As a child, Reepicheep had always dreamt of going to Aslan's country, and he knew that Aslan's country was after the edge of the end of the world, in a different world. And he was willing to leave everything behind and never come back to Narnia just to have a glimpse of Aslan's world. And so Aslan tells them with Reepicheep that Edmund and Lucy and Eustace should also go too. And so the 4 of them get into a paddle boat and they row to the edge of the world. There they say goodbye to Reepicheep, who takes off on his new adventure in Aslan's country, while the other three stand on the shore at the edge of the world. There, they see a lamb who transforms into Aslan, and he tells Edmund and Lucy this will be their final time in Narnia. Just like Peter and Susan learned everything that they could from here, and that they need to learn to know him by the name that the people on Earth know him by. Which they don't tell us what that name is in the chronicles, but we probably could all guess what it is. And if you haven't, we will look into that in the next Narniaverse video. Lucy, Edmund, and Eustace end up going back to London, while Caspian sails back with his crew back to Ramandu's island to pick up the four lords that are now awake, and also his new bride. And so the journey towards God is complete. We start by unshackling ourselves from the things and temptations of the world that are going to keep us away from being able to search for God. Then we must undress all the layers that we have built on ourselves so that we can conform with the society and the conditions that we are living in, and be grateful for who we are and what God has made us to be. We also have to abandon the idea of possessiveness and power, because in truth nothing belongs to us, it all belongs to God. And we must learn to respect our value and understand that God has put us here for a reason, that despite how we look like, despite how people treat us, that we are worth something, or else we wouldn't be here. And that even when we don't know what to do, God will always send someone to us to guide us. We just have to be willing to listen. We shouldn't chase every dream and hope that we have, because not all of them are going to be beneficial to us. Some of them may be detrimental. And even if we are on the path to that, God will always send someone to help us, to make sure that we're never going into something that is above our own capability. And finally, as we can learn from the three lords on Ramandu's island, when we have gone through trial and tribulation, when we have gone through an incredible experience which makes us closer to God, then we have multiple outcomes of how to learn and develop from it. Just getting out of it isn't the resolution. We as an individual have changed. We have to process what we have gone through. And there are different ways that one could do that. Some people want to look back at the past and want to return to the state that they were in before that trial came to them. Others are content with the present and just want to take in what they currently have. Whereas others are ambitious. They want to take their new learned skills and push them forward into the future, trying to understand themselves even more. But the worst thing that one can do is pick up the stone knife and stab God in the back, aka go back on the lessons that they have learned through that trial. This story is truly something else when it comes to hidden gems in the Narniaverse. There is so much that one can take from it, and the movie kind of did a good job in preserving some of these elements, especially when it comes to Caspian, Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace as individuals. But I do think that it misses a lot of the elements when it comes to the lords and their fates and the journey that the Dawn Treader is actually going on, because it changes the format of the story. I find the movie to be quite mediocre. It's not something that I would particularly recommend. I feel like it exaggerates a lot of things, especially when it comes to Edmund and Lucy, which makes it difficult to stomach because we already know and love these characters, and they feel they feel odd in this particular installment. So it is sad to see that, but I do think that the creators were trying to stick to the source material, they just didn't do it very well. But it does highlight some of the important concepts which are presented in the novel, so I will give them that. Well, that was the final movie in the Narnia trilogy, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. If you want to watch it for yourself, please make sure to use a streaming platform that doesn't support the violation of human rights or the spread of negativity in the world. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on the next Narniaverse video, which will come out in a few weeks. Please share it to anyone who is also into Narnia, and be brave, be happy, and be kind, and we'll catch you all next time.